And let me ask you about that, because he says that China is our greatest foe. He says China is, of course, he says right here in the offices, we all know China. We don't talk about it publicly, but we all know that's the case. Let me ask you point blank. Is the United States military right now, if something were to break out, which is very possible, if you're talking about what's happening in the Taiwan Strait and what China wants to do, what they've stated, point blank, is the United States military right now prepared to handle any kind of a major war? Mr. Carr, and by the way, people can follow you at Jack Carr, 2Rs USA on X. I wanted to get your opinion as someone who has served in a way that people could argue very prolific. Were you watching? Did you see the footage? And what is your reaction as someone who's been on the ground?
I saw that earlier today. I don't know if I saw the whole thing that you guys showed earlier because I just hopped on. But, well, a couple of things. First off, that watch was pretty interesting. Like, that watch was, like, very large and just, like, a lot going on with the watch.
I think he stole it from the local Cher fan club, but yes.
So there's something going on there. And then the hand wringing. I don't know if you noticed the hand wringing. There's a lot of this going on, which was odd and distracting as well. And I didn't get the setup to that. Was that a date? Was that like an undercover date type operation?
Yeah, it was a date-ish, yes.
Where were they on this date? Well, I mean, it looked like they were like in a cafeteria of some sort. Like,
I know. And by the way, it's a very expensive restaurant, but yes, it looks like a public stall. I know.
Yeah, it really did. There's a bathroom right behind them.
Yes.
People going in and out. It looked like they were like halfway in to that. So what is that restaurant? It's a nice place?
It is. I don't know if I want to ruin the reputation of the restaurant. I forget the name, but it does. You have a nice view overlooking the urinal.
It's something Corral.
It's something Corral.
Golden Shower Corral.
Yes. So, but yes. So yes, it was and I will say this: no alcohol was served, to be clear, because I know that they'll say this guy was drunk. He doesn't matter. He's an underling. None of that is true. We've laid out the receipts. What did you think about some of his comments, particularly on China and on the issues regarding the military recruiting shortfall?
Right. I mean, we've seen that for the last few years now. It should come as no surprise, especially to those who, you didn't have to follow along for the 20 years that we were in Afghanistan. You could just pay attention for a little bit there near the end, particularly in August of 2021, when we actually left, yet had 20 years to prepare for that eventuality. And so parents, people just getting ready to go into the military, maybe they're in high school, they're thinking about taking that route, they're in college, whatever it might be. And that was the best our military had to offer after 20 years of preparation. And you got to see it happen in real time. So that was probably the worst recruiting video you could possibly have. 13 dead Americans, to say nothing about those who are living with the lifelong physical and emotional trauma of the bombing at Abbey Gate. So you get to watch that in real time. So do you think a parent is going to say, hey, you know what? We just saw this performance by the United States military. Well, I was watching for 20 years. You might have been watching for the last 4, but I recommend that you go and join this organization and serve this country, lay your life on the line after what we saw in those videos and on the news.
Well, you don't think a little DEI brings them back into the fold? That's not enough to sweeten the pot?
It seems like they could have done a little bit better if they're thinking like, hey, we had this horrible performance, not just in Afghanistan, but also in Iraq, also Vietnam, everything really since the end of World War II, since 1947, since they changed the War Department to the Department of Defense. Like, that's where really things started to change. Complete loss of accountability. Up to World War II, I mean, you had Lincoln firing generals left and right in the Civil War until he got to Grant. You had George Marshall in the lead up to World War II and all the way through World War II, firing general after general, admiral after admiral if they didn't measure up. And so that allowed them to get the right people in place to win those wars. Right. For some reason, when we changed the War Department to the Department of Defense, there's a shift. So precision in language reflecting precision in thought. Things shift. And ever since then, how many admirals and generals have been held accountable for performance? There have been people that have been fired for affairs and, whatever else, that sort of thing. But for performance,
well, that's not even a metric they care about now. That's what he said.
It's time and rate. You spend your time. You don't get too many DUIs. You don't piss positive on a test. Then you are going to rise to the top of the United States military. And how many generals and admirals do we have now compared to what we had in World War II? It is a top-heavy organization now at those ranks, at those flag level ranks. So it shouldn't be a surprise that those kind of people stay in and come up with this bright idea to recruit the next generation with this, not with amazing films like we had in the 80s growing up. You're watching First Blood, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, Predator, Commando, the Delta Force. You're having all these amazing films. Now what do we have? Not really that. And we have TikTok and China, and we have all these other influences that are not really positive. The power of popular culture has shifted, and not in a way that helps the military. So they come up with DEI to bring people in, it's not making us better prepared for war, which should be the singular focus of the military.
Well, and let me ask you about that, because he says that China is our greatest foe. He says China is, of course, he says right here in the offices, we all know China. We don't talk about it publicly, but we all know that's the case. Let me ask you point blank, is the United States military right now, if something were to break out, which is very possible, if you're talking about what's happening in the Taiwan Strait and what China wants to do, what they've stated, point blank, is the United States military right now prepared to handle any kind of a major war?
I think that China believes they are already at war with the United States. We saw that with Iran starting really in 1979, and before, if you saw what the CIA was doing, meddling in the Middle East before that. But let's say 1979 onward. Proxy attacks throughout the region, Europe even. So Iran, through its proxies, has been at war with us for quite some time. The same thing's happening with China. I mean, you can go all the way back to Sun Tzu and listen and read those writings that talk about deception, the importance of deception, how to win a war battle without firing a shot. Those are the basic principles that Chinese strategy is based upon. Mm-hmm. So they're at war with us right now, buying off politicians leaving office, all of a sudden having direct connections to Chinese companies that are obviously connected to
Don't forget Eric Swalwell was fornicating with a Chinese spy. I mention that every time I can because nothing's happened to him.
Nothing. It's incredible. So they are playing this game that they are very good at. We are not very good at it anyway, recognizing when someone is at war with us. But they have this influence, this slow influence that's been building up over time, buying politicians, buying land next to military bases, not just in the United States, but all around the world, influencing us with TikTok, influencing our response to COVID. There's just so many things that are adding up that point to us to the obvious conclusion that China's already at war with us. They're not just setting the stage, and they might win this war without firing a shot,
right,
which is the penultimate goal.
That is a terrifying thought. Let me ask you this. Why did you join the military? And then I have a follow-up.
I think it was just in my blood from a very early age. My grandfather was killed in World War II. He was a fighter pilot, flew the Corsair, which is the plane with the gull wings that would fold up like this. Yeah. There was again, the power of popular culture. There was a show called Black Sheep Squadron. I watched it in syndication in the early 80s, but it was aired in the 70s about Pappy Boynton. Robert Conrad played Pappy Boynton, Medal of Honor recipient, who flew that same plane as my grandfather. So I got to watch those with my dad. Of course, all the movies that I'm watching of my dad's generation and then my generation as I go through the 80s. So it's just in my blood. I'm going to serve. And I find out what SEALs are at the ripe old age of 7. And from there, and through through a movie called The Frogman, old black and white film that I saw during commercials when I was allowed to switch from football to the strange channel that was the outlier, not ABC, CBS, NBC, but the one outlier that was always playing a war movie on Sundays. So I'd watch those like 2.5 minutes, and my dad would say, switch it back. And I'd switch it back, being the remote control, as those of us who grew up in the 80s and 70s were the remote control back then. And so I found out what SEALs were, and my mom was a librarian, so I went down to local library, did some research on SEALs and special operations, found out that they're some of the most elite operators in the United States military, and that the training is some of the toughest ever devised by a modern military. So I was in. So I was going to serve my country one way or another, and wanted to test myself as well. And buds and the SEAL teams were calling.
So what I take from that story is your mother wanted to drown you by proxy. When she knew about Hell Week, she knew what they were going to do. Said, "Yeah, why don't you sign up for that, son?"
It's quite possible. And also quite possible that she thought I'd grow out of it. Like a lot of times you grow out of it. You're a kid, you want to be an astronaut, you want to do this or something, and you kind of grow out of it. So I think her hope along the way is that I'd grow out of it, but I never did.
Think about the movies the 7-year-olds are exposed to today.
Yeah, I know.
It's not going to lead to being a SEAL.
No, it's not. It's going to lead to being Ryan Gosling and Barbie.
Looking mostly at butts, for buds.
What? Well, there's nothing wrong with butts if it's the right kind. This man has served his country. Let's not. Let's make sure this isn't an honorable interview. Let me ask you this, Jack. Would you? So you said it was in your blood. Do you think you would today, if you're a 20-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, you'd think that you'd join the military now, or do you think you'd be more hesitant?
I think I would, just because of that draw. I recognize that draw early on, not just for me, but because I'm a student of history and have been my entire life. I recognize that it used to be a prerequisite before joining the community, before joining the tribe, because you had to prove that you could add value to that tribe. And it was important back then because you had to, otherwise the species was not going to continue.
Right.
Today, you do not have to. But I think I recognize that, and I think a lot of people, young men in particular, who hit that certain age and don't do something that tests themselves themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it might be, and they just move on into life. And by the time they get into their 30s, 40s, there's something missing. And if they look back, I think it's that critical component. Now, back in a long time ago, it was between ages like 12 and 16. Let's say for us, between 17 and 21, 22. Right in there is that time frame where there's this draw. And in this country, it's typically to go to Marine boot camp. That's the one that comes to people's minds most often. But there's also Army Special Forces Q course, there's Ranger School, there's SEAL training, buds, something that tests you. And that part, if you don't do it when you're young, then it's kind of hard to catch up later on. But I recognized that earlier, and I think I still would today. But I'm also very aware that I'd be stepping in to an organization that is different than it was 20 years prior, if I'm looking back into the pages of history.
Yeah, I would imagine that a lot of people who, let's say they felt the way that you did, right? They had that pull inside of them. They felt that calling. It's got to give you pause if you go, hold on a second, am I going in here with the most qualified teammate next to me? Or am I going in with someone who has no business being there? Wait a second, the person next to me watching my back may have no GED, may not be able to do a push-up, and scored a 10 on the aptitude, but they're there because it's the right color skin or the right orientation, insert whatever ism here today. I tell you, I know a lot of people who served in the military who have said, I don't know if I'd join today.
Yeah, no, it's more, I think the question is, would you encourage or discourage or be neutral to a son or daughter who comes to you at age 17, 18, 19 and says, hey, Dad, I'm thinking about joining. What do you think? Yeah. And it's about providing and having that conversation with them and providing as much information as you can to set the stage for what they're. So as long as they're going in, eyes open, it shouldn't be a surprise that they're stepping in to an organization where, at least at the top, the priorities seem a bit skewed on the one hand, and then, of course, incompetence on the other hand also prevails. It seems time and time again. Because and you can go back to every single admiral general who got up there in front of Congress over 20 years at war and essentially said the same thing. You can go back and look at 2023, 2026, 2029. They said the same thing, used the same buzzwords. We're making progress, just need a little more time, a little more money. Like those things they said for 20 years. And eventually, people are going to wake up to the fact that, hey, at the top, we need some changes. And what does that mean? It means a bold adjustment. What Lincoln did during the Civil War, what George Marshall did in the lead up and through World War II, which is fire the flag officers, fire the generals, fire the admirals, put people up there because of their competence, not because of their time and rate. Well,
it's going to be very different history if it continues down this path. A few generations down the line, maybe reading about Custer's last negligee. Gerald, you had a question.
Well, and so, Jack, thank you very much for all you've done for the military, and for obviously speaking about these issues. Like I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered it in the last part of your response there, the specific changes that you need. Do you think getting rid of these generals and getting rid of these flag officer positions and being able to kind of move through those would do it? Or really, I mean, it kind of presupposes that you have somebody with the balls to do that is their commander-in-chief.
Right. The question is, where are the next George Marshalls? Do they even exist? Or is this organization such a gigantic bureaucracy at this point where you can't move it in a certain direction? You can't make these systemic shifts that need to be made, these bold adjustments. And I don't know the answer to that question. It seems like we should have learned our lesson after 1947 when we look at Vietnam, when we move even through the 80s and the 90s, and obviously the last 20 years. It seems like we're not capable of making those changes because this thing is so large and it is so bureaucratic, it is so top-heavy, and it is so powerful. And also, I hate to say it, maybe it is something that some sort of outside event that will force us to do that. And whether that's war with China or it's some natural disaster or whatever it might be. But at this stage, that's kind of what I think it would take for those changes to occur. But it's about accountability. There's a complete lack of accountability. Without reinstituting accountability, we're going to stay on the same track that we're on now.
My problem, though, with that is that if there is some kind of event, wouldn't it be too late then? Wouldn't we be too far down the path, essentially, to be able to turn this thing around?
Yeah, but the one thing that gives me hope is that we are adaptable. And also another thing that gives me hope, because I try to look at when I sit down at the end of the day and have a glass of wine with my wife on the couch, try to look for something to be hopeful about. And it is looking at the end of the Civil War and how we came back together. We fought ourselves in our country in the bloodiest war we've ever been in. And yet somehow we came back together after the Civil War. So looking back at that gives me a little bit of hope, because we're not there yet. But it proves that we can come together.
Yes, the primary difference, though, was by the end of that war, those people weren't amputees by choice. We're sending in people right now who are being amputated pre-war, which used to be, wait, what? You amputated? Well, you're not mentally fit to be out there in battle.
That's a significant difference, true. And we also didn't have social media. We didn't have these companies and institutions so powerful that they can change behaviors and thoughts because of what you're carrying around in your hand. So I often wonder if we did have social media, had that technology at the end of the Civil War, if we had that in the mid-1860s, would we still be here as a country today?
Yeah, back then our social media was dropping leaflets on Hiroshima to let them know, like, hey, we're coming. So let me ask you this. Your book, Red Sky Mourning, can you tell people about it before you go? Because I know it's available in June.
It is. So it's the 7th book in the James Reese Terminal List series. Chris Pratt stars in the Amazon adaptation of my first novel. So this is number 7, which was fun for me to write because I got to put in these nods to Ian Fleming and James Bond in there as well for fans of that series because it was very influential on me growing up. But this one is really about loyalty. Each book has a theme. This is about loyalty, but it's also about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, passive targeting, hypersonic weapons, and what that means when you're looking at the United States and China. So all of that is thrown together in the pages of Red Sky Mourning.
And I know that Fleming and James Bond was an influence on you, but I would imagine that yours are more accurate as it relates to the weapons used. Remember in James Bond when he gives him the 32 Walther from the old Beretta, he goes 32 caliber. It's like throwing a brick through a plate glass window.
Yep, he has an even smaller one before that.
Yeah, the Beretta 25, I think, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of exactly nice work. It's actually I have one right over there in the safe. But it's interesting because those ones you kind of suspend disbelief, which is fun. So if you know going into them that you don't need to look for accuracy and weapons and tactics and those sorts of things, you go into that for the fun of it. Whereas some other shows, it's you're looking for that authenticity and you're looking for that touch point with reality. But so they're kind of different. So I give them a little bit of leeway when it comes to the tactics and the weaponry.
Yes, no, it was fun, but a lot of people don't. Well, because Walther obviously is a sponsor of the show, but a lot of people don't realize his first gun was a Beretta, and it was a 32, not the 380, because they don't sell 32. Almost nobody buys that caliber anymore. But a 32, look, will it shoot a man dead? Sure. It's not like throwing a brick through a plate glass window.
I don't want to get shot with anything. You know?
No, I don't want to get shot with anything either, but he acts like he's walking with a howitzer. All right, Jack Carr, we have some other guests to get to here today. No, it's at Jack Carr USA on Axe. Sound like a body spray. X.
It's the X.
I said Axe. I'm an idiot. Thank you very much for taking the time, and thank you for everything you've done for the country, sir. We appreciate it.
No, thanks so much. Take care.
Be well. Jack Carr, everybody. See, he gave me a compliment because I knew about the shitty early weapons of James Bond.
Really?
Not the Walther, the Beretta. Not that Beretta only makes crap.
You know,
do you realize? I think it was the 25 is the most useless caliber that's ever existed. Really? It's basically a 22, only more expensive to produce because it's rimfire. It's center fire. Like, can we take a 22, but make it less mass producible?
Watch Louder with Crowder live Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.